So, Professor, we've been really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in the UK, America, right away around the world who woke up, saw the strikes happening and going, why did this happen? This doesn't seem to make any sense.
Yeah.
So could you just explain what you think is the American strategy for this war and why they started
Well,
it?
I can also try to explain why these strikes, I couldn't have said the date, but why they were almost inevitable that they were going to happen. So I've been modeling the bombing of Iran for 20 years. And it's important to understand that starting in 2002, the relationship between the United States and Iran fundamentally changed. Now, for decades before that, there was political tension. Absolutely. There was issues of Israel. Absolutely. But what happened in 2002 is that's when we discovered, the American government discovered, that Iran was going to enrich uranium. That became the Natanz issue, and they were getting equipment from Pakistan. So this was 2002. Well, in 2002, these were just holes in the ground. Think of it as giant football fields underneath the ground about 100 feet that were being dug out, Well, by 2005, they actually had some concrete facilities and they were actually starting to put centrifuges in. That's when I started to model the bombing of Iran. Right from the get-go, right from the beginning, I do this in my strategy class at the University of Chicago, which I'm about to teach again, and I taught last spring, and I teach every spring. And the last day is 90 minutes simulation of the bombing of Iran and what's going to happen. I've been doing that for now it'll be 21 years. And also right from the get-go, I was very familiar with the idea of double tap attacks. In fact, I think I may be the first person on print to talk about that in a Cy Hirsch article. So Cy Hirsch was a reporter for The New Yorker, did a lot of pieces for The New Yorker. And he called me up one day because we had talked to me on other things. And he said, Bob, I really think that we're going to use a nuclear weapon, attack nuke, to take out Natanz. And I said, Cy, I realize you're always looking for a controversial angle here, because that's what he made his whole living on. And I said, but that's just not what we're going to do. And he said, what do you mean? I said, we're going to do double tap attacks with precision weapons. He said, what do you mean? I'm calling the Air Force. Nobody's talking about this. And I said, no, let me explain to you, Cy. So you know that GPS exists, and that is how we guide our bombs. What you may not know is GPS is not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. So even though in history we have never done this, I said, Cy, what we're going to do is we're not going to want to use attack nuke, and it's just not where we're going to go. What the necessity is going to create the mother of invention. And even though we've never done this in history, and there may be no plans in the Pentagon to do this, we're going to do double tap attacks. And he said, what do you mean, Bob? I said, we're going to take 2,000-pound bombs, which we had at the time, JDAMs they're called, and these create radii of between, of blast, where in dirt it's about 50 feet, in concrete it's about 25 feet. So just to give you a sense of the radius we're talking about. And what we're going to do is we're going to target Natanz, and we're going to have one bomb hit the first top of Natanz, and we're going to time the second bomb to come in 15 to 30 seconds later. We're not going to wait to do bomb damage assessment. We're literally going to plan the double tap, and we're going to estimate how deep the first one went. And then we'll have the second bomb hit just about 25 feet or so deeper. Then we'll have a third bomb hit, and we're going to get into those centrifuges. Well, he published that. It's either 2004 or there around in the New Yorker. Your folks listeners can go find it. Well, that is how I started to model the bombing of Iran. So I said, we're going to take these B-2s. Here's the target set. Here's what we can find. Now, as I'm doing this, Iran is developing from Natanz to Fordow, and there's a whole discussion of that I can give you. And then we too when Fordow came on, we build the Moab, which is the 30,000-pounder. So all the way along the way, every year I'm updating. Now, that's like the details of this, of the actual on paper. But what does it mean in terms of the attack? What's the strategic reality? So right from the beginning, it was always going to be clear that we, the Americans, would be able to attack Natanz and Fordow with 90+% tactical success, meaning the bombs would hit their targets. We would kill scientists. So I went through all the different targets here that we were going to destroy. But we would be able to do that more effectively by far than the Israelis, because we could carry in our bombers bigger payloads than they could. And so what you would end up with is high degree of tactical success in stage 1 of the escalation, but very little strategic success. And why is that? Because this tactical success would not destroy, disable, melt down the enriched uranium. That is the actual strategic target.
Why not?
Because you couldn't be sure you might be able to disrupt the centrifuges. So just to give you a sense of the way this is set up. So let's just pick Natanz, just for one here. So Natanz is like a football field here. So it's 100 meters, by 25 meters across. And you've got rows of centrifuges here, which are about the size of us, maybe a little shorter than us, except there's thousands of them in these rows. So when you do the double tap attacks, you are always likely, even if you didn't quite get to the chamber itself, to cause earthquake. And that earthquake would always likely to be, so this is having studied bombing for a long time, there's a blast effect. You see what I mean? So the blast effect itself was very likely to disable maybe 50, 70, maybe even 90% of these centrifuges, in which case you would stop the industrial production enrichment of the uranium, okay? But the problem is that you wouldn't necessarily even cause fires down there. You would be shaking everything up, more or less. Now, maybe you might cause fires. You wouldn't really know for sure. I'm not saying that none of it could have been destroyed. What I'm saying is that what you could be sure of is the shaking of the centrifuges. That would be the BDA, the bomb damage assessment from on far, would give us high confidence we had created the earthquakes. You see what I mean? What you wouldn't be able to see, and this was always the uncertainty, was what happened to the enriched uranium. Now, I'm not saying for sure none of it would have been damaged. That's not the problem. The problem coming out of this is that enriched uranium, especially as the quantities grew over time, you see, you would only need portions of that to produce nuclear weapons. You would also need even smaller portions of that for radiological weapons, which I'll say more about down the road. So right from the beginning, there was stage 1 of escalation. So in my escalation trap that I published before the war started, I laid out 3 stages of escalation we were going to go through. And this is days before the war, all 3 stages. And we're now about on stage 3. Stage 1 was of the escalation trap was the bombing, tactical success, and we'll go back to June, in Fordow, Natanz, where you do destroy the facility as an industrial uranium enrichment production center, just as I'm describing, okay? And it's 90% plus likely that happened. So, that is true. But you wouldn't know what happened to the uranium itself. And that then would lead to stage 2. And I always said about a year later, 2 years later, actually it happened about 8 months, a little bit sooner, that's when you'd get the regime change war. And the reason, so there had been regime changes called for, from Israel. How would you actually get America behind the regime change war? You would start by going after Fordow and Natanz. Once you did that, you started the trap, because you did destroy, but you probably triggered, you wouldn't know for sure, but you probably triggered dispersal of that material. You see, dispersal.
And we saw some satellite evidence of that.
And I have that on my Substack. So we actually have some civilian. So if we have that in the civilian world, I can guarantee you there is humans, SIGINT, there's a lot of more.
And in fact, you would, just thinking logically, given the 12-day war, President Trump said they obliterated everything, destroyed everything. The fact that there is now a follow-up is clear evidence of the fact that President Trump and his team believe that material is still there.
And President Trump, I cannot get inside his head. I'm not going to put him on the couch. But notice, even after the 12-day war, what did we do? Right back to negotiating with the Iranians. Now, if we had actually destroyed all that enriched uranium, the 1,000 pounds of 60%, the 10,000 pounds of 5 and 20%, what are we talking to them about? Okay, I mean, what is there actually to discuss, you see?